Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I am back with a brand new video, and I'm here with Mike. What's going on, Mike?
I'm good. I'm excited about the news that just came out.
Yes, we got brand new news about Marvel Phase 4, and this time we're really going to focus on Thor, Love, and Thunder. Mike here is the comic book expert. We got a lot of brand new announcements that it seems like Thor is now going to be Jane Foster, and it has a lot of different implications on the MCU. So, Mike, has Jane Foster been in the comics before? What's her origins?
So Jane Foster was, like we know from the movies, it was Thor's girl. And she hung out with Thor and he would rescue her. She was the damsel in distress for years and years in comics. And then a few years ago, Thor lost the hammer. And it ended up in Jane Foster's hands. And she became Lady Thor for a short period of time. For a few years, and that's why we're so excited to see this happen in the comics. It's a big twist. Everyone thought we were going to see Thor in Guardians of the Galaxy, and now we see that he's going to show up, or the new Thor movie might not even have him in it that much. We don't really know yet, but it's going to be Jane Foster. It's going to be Natalie Portman as Lady Thor.
It could basically be either Thor 4 or it could be Thor 1, the start of Jane Foster's iteration of Thor.
Yeah, that's why it's so exciting, because we don't really know what's going to happen yet in that. We got good guesses from the comics as to what kind of storyline you're going to have.
But what even makes Jane worthy, and how could she wield the hammer even in the first place?
Well, in the Marvel universe, we don't know that yet, but in the comics, it's strange. The hammer itself, we learned that the hammer is sentient. It has a consciousness of its own. And in the comics, it finds her worthy. Thor makes himself unworthy, and he can no longer carry it. And he's not called Thor anymore. He's called simply the Odin son. And he gives up that title. And then all of a sudden, he can't carry his hammer anymore. And then he's fighting someone, and suddenly the hammer shows up, and he thinks it's going to come back into his hands. And lo and behold, bam, it shows up in this Lady Thor's hands. And at first they kept it hidden. They didn't let you know that it was Jane Foster. But eventually it came out. It came out that she had cancer, and it came out that the hammer chose her as the worthy one to hold it. And the hammer does new things for her that it never did with Thor. She becomes essentially a better Thor than Thor was. So Thor's got his own thing going on in the background, and she's now becomes the new Thor. And everyone around the Odin son, now refers to Jane Foster as Thor. They just accept that he renounces the name, and she takes it up. So she's with the Avengers at the same time. She's on Asgard. She's with the Warriors 3. She's protecting the realm from all sorts of different threats for a long time in the Thor series, while Thor was off doing his own thing and was just going downhill after that for a long time. So we've already seen Thor go downhill. He's lost everything in the movies, and now we're going to see the hammer in her hands.
It relates a lot to Thor's character because he has gone downhill. He's basically been broken in the last 3 movies. And now he's heading off on his own. Do you think he's going to actually leave the identity of Thor and she's going to take it up? Because I feel like Chris Hemsworth as Thor has resonated with all of us.
Yeah, it's going to be a hard sell for everyone to accept a new Thor. He hasn't given up his name in the movies. He's still Thor. So it's interesting how, as we see it, it might happen. So what kind of ideas do we have about where the plot is going to be for this new movie? Who's going to be the good guy? Who's going to be the bad guy? Who's going to be in it?
It's how you can do it without it coming out of left field, because Jane Foster's been such a sideline character throughout the whole MCU. She's basically been the damsel of distress, and then Thor broke up with her, and they've been separated ever since. So what would make her worthy enough to come back and to become that female Thor in this iteration?
Right, so we need to think about plot lines. What could be happening in the next Thor for that to happen? Where is Mjolnir, for instance?
So right now it's broken. So it's completely busted. Thor doesn't have it. He has Stormbreaker, and he's on the ship with the Guardians of the Galaxy. If that movie, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, comes out after this new Thor movie, which makes me think, is the Thor that we know going to be in it at all?
Yeah, he's got to make an appearance somewhere. And I don't think the fan base is going to expect for him to show up at some point. But how does the hammer come into her hands is what I've been thinking about. And so you said it's sitting in Norway right now, and and it's sitting there at New. I think that the Asgardians are going to build a monument around the fragments of Mjolnir, and it's going to sit, and Valkyrie is going to want to use it as a representation of the next leader. The next leader is going to have to hold Mjolnir. And I'm imagining a scenario in which Jane Foster shows up there somehow, and the hammer puts itself back together in her hands. And you've got Jane Foster as Thor, and you've got Valkyrie, who we know from the recent news. She's going to be there, and she's going to be in the movie, and she's going to be the new leader of Asgard that we saw from Endgame. And she's going to see Thor as maybe the next leader of Asgard, or the next champion of Asgard. So they're going to accept her because the hammer chooses her, goes back into her hands.
Right. And if it goes back in her hands, I'm not sure about the whole like hierarchy of that, but Valkyrie was chosen to rule Asgard. If Jane Foster is then picked, would Valkyrie then want to be with Jane to legitimize her claim to Asgard?
I don't know.
Since she's the first announced LGBTQ character.
Right. So Tessa Thompson said that Valkyrie would be looking for her queen, I think was the phrase.
Yeah.
So and that's what it will be if she's able to lift Mjolnir. Mjolnir is the symbol of the throne of Asgard. Odin held it. And then Hela held it afterwards, and she was going to be the heir. Then Thor holds it, and now, as we know, it's going to be Natalie Portman in the new one. Jane Foster is going to hold it, so she'll be essentially maybe the new queen of Asgard.
Yeah, and that's essentially what is Love and Thunder then. It's such a random title. Thunder, obviously Thor, but where's the origins of love? And then to justify Jane's transformation to Thor, she has to have a significant enough origin. So looking at it in the MCU, a character that hasn't been as significant, I'm thinking a great way to introduce her is her being alive during the snap, experiencing the 5-year blip where society was cut in half, and she's experienced brushes with the Reality Stone, so she has history with the Infinity Stones, and she's an astrophysicist, so it would make sense for her to try and discover or look into the stones and try and find their origin, and she would end up in Norway, and Norway is where Hela destroyed the hammer. It's where the Tesseract was fought over from the Ice Giants and the Asgardians.
Yeah, it's where Odin dies. So it's got all these remnants of power there. All these important things have happened there.
It's a very significant place, and I think that would lead, Jane, like what you said, to Norway to then discover the hammer, and then, like you said, she could be worthy enough to put the hammer together and summon it.
Well, you might see Anthony Hopkins back again. Like I just said, that's where he died, where he dissipated. He may not be dead. I don't think he's gone. Odin's never gone. He always dies in the comics, but he always comes back in one way or another. He's just a part of the universe. And that's where the hammer is destroyed. So I see some scenario where she shows up. You've got Anthony Hopkins doing a cameo appearance in the film at that point. The hammer comes back together, and she's revealed as the new Thor.
I wouldn't be surprised if the MCU tries to wrap it up in some way. Like, the mission that she's on makes her worthy, her dealing with cancer and still pursuing that, but also Thor chose her. They could use that relationship. Thor saw her as worthy.
Sure.
They could justify
it that way. Maybe he fell in love with her for a reason, and it's for the hammer. Thor, in his own way, he loves the hammer too. It's seen as almost. He talks about it in the movies when he loses it, like he lost a loved one, right? So you've got this love of the hammer, and that comes into a lot in the comics also, because right now in the comics, Mjolnir is also destroyed, which happens in the same conversation. It happens with Lady Thor. She destroys the hammer. But when she becomes Lady Thor, it ends with her sacrificing herself. So she dies in the comics, fighting this character called Mangog, which is like the personification of anger and rage. So as long as there's anger and rage, there is Mangog, and it destroys everything. So the hammer is destroyed, and Thor is at a loss. He's lost his hammer, first to Jane, and now it's gone. And there's this theme of his loss of love, his loss of life with the hammer. So that might even be a continual theme that's going to happen in the new movies with Love and Thunder. Maybe love for that hammer in some way. But you've also got the they're talking about Tessa Thompson looking for a queen. There could be some sort of love triangle, Tessa Thompson, Natalie Portman, and Thor going on there at the same time. Interestingly, there's also another character in the comics that they haven't talked about. One of the only ones from Asgard they haven't talked about yet, and that's Amora, the Enchantress. And her power is making people fall in love with her and with each other. That's what she does. She's like a Cupid kind of witch woman of Asgard.
And she just sits back and watches?
Well, she always, like, in the comics, she'll, like, make Thor fall in love with her, and then she gains power that way, or makes someone else fall in love with her. And it's the only main character in the Thor universe that has anything to do with love, an essential aspect of what happens. There's not a lot of romance in Thor comics, really. There's just his love for Jane, which never really happens, and then he's got love for Sif, and that doesn't really flesh itself out either. And then you've got the villain whose power is love, which shows up.
Right. And they have it all planned out, too. They said even Phase 5 is planned out. And it seems like they brought Thor down to ground zero for a reason. Like what you said, he's now going to be kind of Odin's son. And she's going to take on the mantle of Thor. But I find it funny because he's going to go through that with the Guardians of the Galaxy. And maybe when she's come through her own, he'll return and they'll end up back together again or not,
Yeah, it took everybody at a left field, this release of this film, because everyone expected Thor to show up in Guardians. And they expected it to be as Guardians of the Galaxy. Will that still happen? And how is this movie, it's going to be released first. How is Thor going to be in this movie and also in space with the Guardians of the Galaxy? Are the Guardians going to show up in the Thor movie? Which would be amazing, but that's a lot of scheduling. That's a lot of actors to get thrown together. It's much easier to have Thor in a Guardians movie than it is to have the Guardians in a Thor movie. And how will that interplay with everything? Other than a brief cameo? I don't know.
But they might just retcon it and have him use Stormbreaker to teleport there and back. He'll be there for both movies.
Yeah, he can be either way. I think he's still going to be an essential part of it.
Well, he's the only important character now. That he's been in Phase 1, 2, and 3, and he's been one of the main 3. So it will be interesting to see if he takes more of a leading role, because right now he seems like he's trying to find himself.
Yeah, you have to think about his state of mind right now, where he's at. Because he was down, Thanos is done, and he's with the Guardians, and he seems to be happier and being more comedic in his role, and he's out of his slump. Is he gonna show up with, like, slim down and trim the beard and look good again and be a new God of Thunder? He has no purpose now. His arc has ended, right? So it can go in any direction right now, which is the most exciting part of it. And that's why they threw in Lady Thor, because they're done with Thor's main arc. So now he might just be a side character or stay on with the Guardians as a side character, because his role as the main character is finished.
Right, and then Jane's gonna pick it up.
I think that we're gonna see a threat to the Asgardians in some way. They've got a new plot of land. They're trying to rise. They're trying to reestablish their society there, and there's got to be a threat to them that also brings Lady Thor and Thor into play. So these could be different threats, like Amora the Enchantress, like we spoke about before, or it could be a number of other threats that exist to the Asgardians. But it could also be something more, like, not from comics, but it could be something more Earth-based that's a threat to them. You have the Asgardians living on Earth, and how does that interweave itself with geopolitics on the globe? This happens in the comics. Asgard appears above Oklahoma in the comic books, and there's a whole series called Siege, which is amazing piece of writing, in which Norman Osborn is now leading S.H.I.E.L.D., and he attacks Asgard. So you have a threat that comes that's dealt with by political powers on Earth. So you might have S.H.I.E.L.D. interplaying with Asgard.
Yeah, so all in all, it just seems like, the Thor that we've come to know, he's on his arc, learning what he needs to learn, and this film seems a lot like an origin story. Valkyrie taking her place and mantle to lead the new Asgard on Earth, and Jane Foster taking up the mantle of Thor while he's gone. and then whether he comes back, who knows? But it'll be really interested to see what happens, and I'm sure this movie is going to have a lot of implications on Phase 4 and 5. But that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, see you guys later.
See ya. Thanks.